gente hacia un propósito común que lleve a la sociedad a un nivel superior. Y dice que en tiempos de crisis, en tiempos de cambio, en tiempos de conflicto, es cuando más importante se hace esta cualidad y más oportunidades se abren a los líderes para movilizar a la sociedad hacia estadios superiores y mejores. En México estamos viviendo una época de cambio en donde hay una polarización clara de la sociedad. Una gran parte de la sociedad, queramos o no queramos, apoya el cambio y las políticas del gobierno actual. Y otra gran parte pues se opone, critica y está totalmente apuesto a esas políticas. Es una polarización que de una u otra manera hay que terminar y hay que tender puentes. We need to build bridges to solve this conflict, porque de otra manera el país se nos va a escapar. Esa es la función de ANEI. La función de ANEI es crear puentes, es buscar la forma de movilizar a toda la sociedad, especialmente a los empresarios independientes, hacia objetivos que lleven a México a un nivel superior. Por eso es la contribución de Michael is very important, since he has that position, he has that thinking, and I'm sure that we will enjoy very much this talk with him. Thank you, Mike, for coming, Michael, and we are ready for your words. Thank you very much.
Michael, the camera is all yours, so welcome again. Michael will be doing a presentation, sharing a presentation with us, which actually is going to be available. Eduardo will be sending that presentation later on. Michael, welcome again.
Está en mute, Samuel.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now, Samuel?
Yes, I can. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Welcome again.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for your elaborate introduction. I appreciate that, and thank you for facilitating this event over the past few days. You've made it very, very easy for us to connect. Thank you. I appreciate your effort. Fernando, a dear friend, you have always been an inspiration. Thank you for the invitation. Since our time at Harvard at the Kennedy School, you were one of the most inspiring and active members, not just because of your background, but also because the scope of your thinking. You always had this large perspective, and you're always involved and active in a very dynamic spirit, and always concerned about global issues, not just from a Mexican perspective. I appreciate your invitation, and I'm very proud, and I cherish a lot our friendship. I hope that soon after this COVID thing is over, I would have the opportunity to come and visit your beautiful country. I know there are many, many Lebanese there in Mexico. I hope they're contributing in a good way to the economy, and I'm sure you have friends there. And when I come, I would like also to meet your family and also many of the members of your esteemed association. I would like to start by suggesting that this becomes a conversation, because I have read a little bit about your association. I have asked Samuel also a few questions. It's very impressive how you include a diverse and rich number of people. So whoever is attending now, is participating in this webinar, I would like you to help me and make this an active conversation, because I am sure we can all learn from each other. What I will do is I will try to use my perspective from the 30 years or so that I spent in the media. I spent much of my time in Reuters in more than 22 countries, and my last job was I was the CEO for Reuters in the Middle East. So I always try to maintain this global perspective, looking at news from a global dimension. And I will also introduce my interest also in the subject of leadership to see how we can look at things from a global perspective, but also introduce the leadership dimension. My talk will be divided into 3 parts. Part number 1, I will go from macro and zoom in into the micro. So I will talk about the global challenges post the COVID-19 epidemic. And from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about Mexico, zooming in a little bit. And so that I can then move to the 3rd part to suggest how we exercise leadership or from the perspective of Mexico or from the perspective of the global community, so that we adapt, survive, and thrive in the world, in the current reality, and in the world that is coming post COVID-19. So I'm going to go from the macro to the micro. I'm going to share my slides. And we're going to go through the slides. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to interrupt and ask. And more importantly, if you have any comments to make on the subjects, please jump in, because as I said, let's tap into our collective experience and intelligence. Now, to begin with, I would like to highlight a number of key principles, almost philosophical principles, that draw the parameter, define the parameter of this talk and my thinking in general, especially in regard to our subject. So this is the definition. Everything I say is going to consider that whatever the points I will mention now are the pillars of this conversation. Number 1, that life is dynamic. Life is not static. So nothing is fixed. Everything is in constant motion, from the Big Bang till eternity, and even before the Big Bang, we don't know. The universe and every component of the universe is a state of motion. So that's the first pillar or fact of life or nature of reality, that life is dynamic. The second thing is, because it's dynamic, nothing stays the same and everything is changing, as you know. So we're always living in a state of constant change. The third element, it is called the concept or the principle of entropy. And this is the second law of thermodynamics. Basically, entropy means that over time, things degenerate, things move into chaos. Everything in the end will collapse and die. Hence, the importance of paying attention to things. So even if we do nothing, life will continue in a dynamic and changing state, but it will eventually go towards entropy, i.e. a state of collapse. That's why we need to pay attention to things. That's why the concept of adaptation is so important, because if you don't adapt in an environment that's dynamic, that's changing, where the general trend of things is going by default into collapse, into a state of chaos, then you will have an existential problem and we will die. And this is something to remember at all levels, at a personal, family, organizational, business, country, and also at a global community level. The other point is that you can't defeat the fundamentals. If you don't deal with the fundamentals, as stated by the laws of physics, as stated of the laws of human behavior, then it will not work. There are no shortcuts in life. You can't, over time, ignore the fundamentals. Tactically, you might do cut and paste, but without looking at the foundational issues, without looking at the fundamentals, then things will collapse. So we have to keep in mind always the fundamentals. The 6th point is the concept of actions and consequences. Every action we take has consequences. And every action we don't take, if we have to, there will also be consequences. So there is no escape of the concept, of the philosophical concept of consequences. The only thing you get to choose is the poison, the nature of the poison you drink. There is no escape from the poison if you don't deal with the fundamentals, if you don't adapt, if you don't take care of things so they don't fall into the concept of entropy, because things are changing and things are always in a dynamic state. So consequences are important. The last point, or before the last, is leadership. We need leadership because without leadership, people will make the wrong actions. Mexico will take the wrong steps. Your organization, you as a head of a family, will make the wrong decisions, wrong actions, and that will lead to negative consequences. And without leadership, people will ignore the fundamentals, will go into shortcuts, and that will create damage, and it will fail the process of adaptation. That's why leadership is super important in the context of what we will talk about now. The last point, which is not on this slide, is the concept of the impact of stress. Every time there is a stress on a system, laws of physics say the system will crack at its weakest point. Why am I saying that? Because COVID now is putting stress on the entire global community in all its dimensions. Every side, economic, geopolitical, social, you name it. And what's happening now is that wherever there is a crack, there is a point of weakness, that there is a point that hasn't adapted in the process of survival of going forward, it will be under pressure and it will crack. So what I'll talk about now is especially highlighted because of the impact of COVID as it's putting the system, the entire global system, as it's putting Mexico and your entire organizations and families, and maybe yourself also, under stress. And that will make, as I said, the weakest point appear and collapse and come to the surface. All the tension will come to the surface. So these 8 points are the parameters or the underlying philosophy of what I'm going to talk about from now on. Let's keep them in mind so that we can move forward. These are the pillars of our thinking. When we talk about global challenges, there are a number of global challenges, a number of them, starting with the classic global challenges, like the threat of nuclear war, like the threat of pandemics, like the threat of disintegration into collapse of the world order. There is the issue of food, issue of water supplies, issue of education, issue of health, issue of overpopulation. There are many, many, many dimensions to the current and the foreseeable global challenges. What I will do, as you can see on this slide, I will highlight only 5 of them, because talking about all of them is too much and is without the scope of this brief intervention. So I'm going to talk about these 5 pillars of the global challenges as they are now and as they will continue, and in terms of the impact that this pandemic that we're going through will take place. We went into phase 1 of the pandemic, then it calmed down, and it's obvious that we're going now into phase 2 of this, especially as we go into winter. So this hasn't ended, and as per all the data that's coming from from the IMF, from the World Bank, and from the OECD and other organizations, it seems that whatever we had predicted in terms of impact on global economy, on other aspects of our international community, the real impact will be much more. So what we're going to do now is talk about each of these and see how will they be impacted as we move forward. How does that make sense to you now? Is that fine? Is it clear? Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So that's the framework. Now, I'm going to talk about the issue of geopolitical instability. This was the case before COVID-19, and this is the case now, and it will further continue. These are global risks that were before COVID at the beginning of this century, and they continue now, and COVID is making them even bigger. So the size of these challenges, the size of these global risks from a global perspective will increase. If you're a businessman who's running a global operation, if you are part of in a government structure that is part of a global community, if you're a global leader, political leader, you have to think in these terms, because this is going to be the nature of reality that we will talk about. The first one is the failure of national governance. That's the first point. That's the first risk. What we're facing, what we have been facing as a risk, and will continue to face even more under COVID, is that the national governance, the governance system within the countries, because of the stress of COVID, right, is under the threat of being failed, of collapsing. Things like law and order, things like major, the main institutions of the country. So COVID is putting all of these systems under threat. It was already under threat before due to the political tensions that happened because of the trend of nationalization that was sweeping in many countries of the world. So that was putting the entire fabric of society under tension. COVID is making it under more stress. So we have that important risk to pay attention to, the failure of national governance system within the country, the rule of law and the institution that holds society together. The other one is the failure of regional and global governance systems. So things like legal leagues, legal alliances, United Nations. We already have seen the tensions on the WHO and the World Health Organization and other global entities also. So this already was under tension before COVID. After COVID, let's take WHO as an example. You've seen how the tension spread to that because of the way COVID was mentioned and was managed and how this thing was politicized. So there are regional tensions. And now in the Middle East, I don't know if you're following up, there are tensions between, Greece and Turkey, and there is the tensions between Libya and in the Gulf and in Iran and Israel, and there are tensions within Europe, and Brexit already was there before COVID. So you name it. When it comes to regional and global governance systems, these governance systems that were controlling and ensuring some stability, now they're under pressure because of the stress that COVID has put on the economy and on society and on the local political systems and the international relations that binds countries together. So this is the second risk on a global geopolitical level. The third one is the state of collapse or crisis in some of the countries. So there has always been a danger that some states will collapse, fragile states will collapse because they already were weak from inside. Now, COVID came and put the entire system under more stress. And as I said earlier, stress makes the system, a weak system, crack and disintegrate. So that danger of collapsing state now is much more, and that of course will put pressure on the geopolitical stability in the world. The last one is the civil unrest. We already are seeing that in many countries. I mean, look at Belarus, look at next to you, your neighboring country, United Nations, how issues that have been centuries old, under the skin of the society, they've been sitting there. The stress of COVID is bringing all of this to the surface. And there are many other issues will come to the surface because that's the nature of reality. When you subject a system to pressure, it will start cracking down. So these four risks at a geopolitical level were already existent before, and now COVID will make them worse. So if you're a political leader, a business leader working on a global level, you have to keep these risks in sight so that you know how to plan strategically for your country and your society and your business. The second kind of risk at the global level that we're talking about is the economic crisis. Now, the economic crisis, of course, this has been one of the major ones next to the health crisis, because the COVID hit the economy in its heart, bigger than, far worse than we all expected. And this was highlighted in inflating the issue of inflation itself. There was already the risk of inflation before COVID. Now, with the way many countries are injecting cash, printing money to support their societies, their economies, you can imagine the impact on inflation. And I have heard the report, and that's my view also, that this should continue. Europe and the world economy, the G20 and the United States, especially including Europe, have already injected enough cash into the economy. And now there is need to inject even more cash, print more money and inject it into the economy. And that will raise the issue of inflation. And there are alarming signals that if this did not happen, it will make the problem much worse. So it is recommended, highly recommended by all thinkers, especially economists, that this continue. We should not withdraw our injection of cash and support of the economy very fast so that we don't repeat the mistakes that had happened in the previous recession in the early 2000s. We should maintain that and keep injecting, because otherwise the consequences of economic consequences of COVID will be much worse. But that has no escape except to influence inflation. And we will see that inflation will continue to rise more than we expected, or more than we were worried about before COVID started. The second one is the shortage of critical infrastructure. There were already shortage of infrastructures before on the economic level, communications, roads, airports, financial institutions, you name it. All the elements, the infrastructural element of economy, many countries were suffering from shortages for that. COVID came and put all of these infrastructures under more stress. So countries that did not have enough communication system suffered. Countries did not have enough, transportation system suffered. Countries did not have strong financial institutions and banks suffered because of COVID. So that has been highlighted over the past few months because of COVID. The third one is the fiscal crisis in many key economies. So many budgets now are in the red because of the COVID and the impact on the economy. Not only that, many countries are defaulting, right? They will, or at least are expected to default in their domestic and global debts because they can't afford it. They divert all resources to dealing with COVID. At the same time, they have to fulfill their long-term economic obligations to the international community and to the entities that were lending them money. But they have to make choices, and they have to divert finances and all the resources locally, and that created all these pressures. The other one is the high structural unemployment. I mean, before COVID, there were unemployment. Now, I don't need to elaborate on this. You can just look into your country and look into the United States and the big major economies and see how employment has been, major, at a historic level. Now, I have to say this, that in the previous recessions, usually the upper class community, the community that is armed with education and all the, resource of adaptation, this will escape. There's no problem with that. The middle class in this situation might also escape some of the pressures because they have enough basic education to, and tools to adapt. I think what will happen in this situation now, because of COVID as a global threat, the lower part of the society, will be hit most because of the nature of this threat and the way it is, social distancing and working from home, and you don't want people to come to your home. There's no contact. So many people at the bottom part of the pyramid will also be influenced, and that will create many social problems. So these are also global challenges that are derived from the economic crisis. Of course, there's the issue of illicit trade, because now it's chaos and the resources of the countries and the economies are mainly towards survival. So all kinds of illegal trades now will prosper, right? And the impact of that will appear sooner or later because the priorities of the economies now are shifted into dealing with the pandemic. So this is the economic front in terms of the current challenges and the foreseeable challenges under the pressure of COVID-19. Now let's go to the climate kind of challenges as the third component of the major global, challenge that humanity is facing. Now, before COVID, we already had the issue of extreme weather events. We already had that, right? So now we will have it, but we'll have it in terms of bigger impact, because when you have a major weather event happening and a major disaster happening, the impact on a society that already is dealing with this pandemic is bigger, because protection will be less, immunity of the society will be less, priorities will shift to dealing with the crisis, so problems will be much bigger because of these extreme weather conditions. The other point is the failure of the climate change mitigation processes and adaptation. Right? Even before COVID, we had problems in acknowledging the issues of global warming, and we had, during the Obama period, before Trump, and I'm not speaking politically here, but as a fact of life, the spirit was different. After now, the current administration, things change, and the world mechanisms to deal with climate changes mainly were weakened, and some of them became useless or became paralyzed. So that even will have a bigger impact now as we go into the problems of COVID, and the disintegration on the political level and on the global cooperation level that COVID has further accelerated, because now we have more geopolitical tensions, we have less collaboration, and we have more disintegration. So we have less opportunities to come together and deal with these risks. The third one is the biodiversity losses and the ecosystem collapse, because all resources now are going into dealing with the pandemic, right? So who has time now in terms of government priority to dealing with these issues? Yet, you hear from, at least your continent, how the rate of the disintegration of Amazon forest has speeded up recently, and people are not paying attention because there are other priorities. So because of the pandemic, this threat, this global risk has increased. Of course, there will go also the same for major natural resources, major natural disasters, and because of human-made environmental disasters. Just to give you an idea, we have all heard how when there was a global lockdown, how it was clearly evident to the entire world, planet Earth started to recover. You heard how the canals in Venice became so clear that you could see dolphins and fish there, right? We could see from India, the cities of India, you could see Mount Everest. The same thing for Europe. The climate started recovering, and pollution and noise and the way planet was shaking during all of this economic movement and movement of people. So it became evident during that lockdown period the impact that civilization or humanity is having on the global ecosystem and global climate. And I expect that when after this is over, all of this argument will be used, and the tensions between those who argue against the reality of global warming and global threats, environmental threat, and those who are supporting the evidence that this exists, this tension will be even further increased, because what happened during COVID, the lockdown, provided rare evidence about the impact that human beings are having on nature and the future of humanity in general. Now I'm going to go into the technological threats that are facing humanity and how this has been further increased due to the COVID-19. And there will be even a bigger challenge after in the post-COVID-19 world. The first one is the adverse consequences of technological advances. I'll just give you an example of what that means. We have all been hearing about the impact of artificial intelligence and how this face recognition systems and surveillance, and how all of this, has issues when it comes to privacy issues, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to confidentiality, when it comes to, respecting the laws and order that guard human interaction and their confidential dynamics. Now, because of the pandemic, this has fallen behind as a priority. Now you have all these applications that track where you are, and they track also who have been you're in touch with. And just think of China as an example, how all of these mechanisms that track people, say surveillance people, are now easily in use. And the question is, this has been already a threat before COVID as a technological, governance threat for humanity. So after COVID now, it will become even worse because people have made them as a second priority because of the threat of, health. And now there is the danger that they become part of life and they become part of our new reality. So all of this has increased the risk of these technological advances on humanity to go forward. The other one is the breakdown of critical information infrastructure. What does this mean? This means, my friend, now the COVID problem has shown the importance of having, using internet for commerce, for interaction, and the way we're interacting now, and how things moved in that direction. Now, problems will appear if, as we continue to have lean more on this, on using this technology, that these systems might collapse. The current global infrastructure and even local one, as we move heavily into using them. I mean, it's just a miracle that the internet has not crashed on the global level with all this traffic that happened after COVID. But as this continues, as this becomes the new norm, as you know, this pressure will continue at the global level, but mainly in some countries, especially in developing countries, they will not be able to cope with it. And they will not even have enough money to upgrade it because they spend most of their money on dealing with the economic issues and the health issues. So that even opened the doors to cyber attacks, because now, in the past, you used to be inside your organization to log into the server, you used to do it internally. Now, people are working from home and they're logging into their servers externally. So all these firewalls now have become vulnerable. So people can easily go into these servers, right? And the issue of cyber attacks and cybersecurity has become more highlighted because of the COVID thing. And this was already a problem in political issues, when we were talking about interventions in elections in the United States and in Germany and in other places. Now, as these firewalls are becoming more vulnerable because of our reliance on this technology now, this issue will become even a bigger risk as we move forward. The last part in technological threats is the issue of the massive incidence of data fraud and threat, because now we're dealing now mainly also all online. So the original threat of fraud and identity theft are now much bigger, because what choices do you have now except doing business through this internet technology? Now, there's also issue of broadband is not available enough in many of, especially developing countries. There's issue that in many countries there's not enough infrastructure for brick and mortar organizations to have a digital infrastructure to move their business digitally. So they will eventually suffer and vanish because they can't do business anymore when people are asked to maintain social distancing and to stay home. So all of these problems on an international level have increased in scale in the post-COVID world. The last point, as you know, is that our health system was already suffering in the past. Now COVID has, of course, as you know, from Mexico and other countries, Brazil, it's a disaster what's happening there. India, I was reading yesterday, 76,000 cases, in one day. Can you imagine 76,000 cases? This is what's recorded. God knows how many hundreds of thousands are not detected, and they're spreading COVID, corona everywhere. So already this was a problem for many countries in the world, including the bigger countries, the first world countries. So this has now proven to be a major issue. And one of the threats to humanity is that we have to deal with this as soon as possible. It is expected that it is by norm, by default, every year, we have two COVID-like pandemics that start, but then they eventually die. 2 per year, we don't hear about. We heard some of them, MERS, SARS, and other ones. But with the current collapsing or at least suffering of the global health system, can you imagine if we have a new one coming from China or other places? I mean, the entire medical community is already under so much pressure and exhausted. Hospitals are out of space and technology is not catching up. So this is going to be a major survival issue. It was before, and many people spoke about it and asked that we are ready, but humanity, we did not listen, of course, because we always operate in a crisis management mentality. But now it is firsthand, and we have to allocate resources to build up this reality in this post-COVID global challenge. We have to create new global protocols at the global level. You can't now afford to hide such information from the world. You have to immediately inform the entire planet, and you have to make sure that there are enough immunity system within your healthcare infrastructure that takes care of such events if they come up in the future. So these, my friends, are a summary or sort of a global overview of the main challenges to humanity, to the global community, to planet Earth that existed just before COVID-19 and that exists now, and that has been inflated and highlighted and increased in risk as global risks, right, after COVID-19. As I said, I haven't mentioned the risk of, tensions between, the superpowers. I haven't mentioned about, China and the United States and, this multipolar system and the reorganization of the global order. Henry Kissinger, I'm sure most of you know who he is, spoke a few months ago about life will be completely different after COVID. The entire world order will change. He didn't say why. He didn't say how. He left it vague. I agree with him, of course, but maybe it has been exaggerated a little bit. But still, fact of matter is that we can see the tensions already. We can already see them. So all of these now are part of reality and have been increased. I mean, before COVID, already China and the United States had already tensions. And after COVID, it became far more, and expected that things will further increase as we move further. In Italy, Europe, there is integration of Europe. Who knows what will happen if there is a wave 2 of coronavirus, spread in Europe. So we're talking about major global threat. And unfortunately, we have a major issue of global leadership now that looks at not just national level challenges, but global level challenges, and forgets the part that we are all connected, that if they messed up in China, Mexico will pay. If they messed up in Mexico, Russia will pay. So this is a fact. It's more obvious than ever. But unfortunately, we live in a time where there are many politicians, but there are not many state people, state politicians, state level of historic magnitude, who can look at with global perspective, who can look at entire humanity rather than domestic short-term, shallow politics. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to go into the Mexican dimension a little bit. So I'm going to now talk about the challenges that Mexico have. But I say that with caution, because in my talks, when I give public speeches all over the world, and I talk about domestic issues, I'm very cautious because I remind myself that we should always have the humility when we talk about the domestic problems of other countries, and not to pretend that we know them more than the countries themselves. You guys are the expert, you know your problems best, and you love your country, and other people have thoughts, but nobody should claim that they know your problems more than you do, and or give you insights more than you have. But because this is about Mexico, I would like to share with you the way the external environment, the global community at a very macro level, looks at Mexico from a macro perspective and highlights maybe some of the macro elements that you have when it comes to your kind of challenges that you have to consider as you deal with the global perspective that we talked about and with the post-corona world, because these are of far more important. The first one, as you all know, and you know this anyway, but the reason I'm saying it is each of these now has more weight, has more damage, has more consequences, needs more urgent action, needs deeper thinking, right? Because these with Corona pose more danger than they used to be before. So it's a highlighted issue for the country's leadership to do something about. But as I said, you already know that. So the first point, my friends, is what are the pluses? What does Mexico have in terms of assets? What are the assets of Mexico? What makes Mexico unique, and what defines Mexico? Number one is your absolutely amazing strategic location. So I mean, if you look at the map, you cannot be more strategic than this in terms of between, North America and Latin America, and right next to the United States. So you know that. Absolutely strategic location. And in some of the best parts, in terms of weather and others. You have absolutely competitive cost basis economy. I mean, very competitive costs when it comes to the economic activity, and you have young talent. So,
Gracias. Avísame ahorita que se van a ir para atrás, Luces. Súbete que quede bien ahí.
There's noise. Can I continue?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. So if we can mute so that, okay, so fine. So of course, you know that you have very competitive when it comes to cost, and you have brilliant people, right? Very smart. All the Mexicans I know, very smart people, open-minded, right? And then you have the size of your market. You have the size of and the strength of internal market. I mean, your economy alone is a challenge in terms of satisfying its need. That alone keeps you busy and going, and that's a major asset, as you know. And then the third and the fourth one is that, my friends, is your ability to manufacture high technological product, and you already do that. I mean, you still have some space to go, but you're catching up when it comes to manufacturing high tech products and machinery. The other element is that you have an open economy, and you brag the fact that you're one of the countries that has the highest number of trade agreements, and that's an asset. That's a wonderful thing, because that shows what a great business-minded people you are. And there is also the issue of open economy that you try to maintain, and that you always keep yourself try to be at par as the strongest economy next to you. So you always you compete with the strongest. You know the saying, to develop, always mingle with people who are more powerful, smarter, richer than you, and that's by default what you do. So you look at the United States, and that's sort of your benchmark that you try to approach. Of course, there's a long way as for the rest of the world, but that's also one of your strength points, is that you have a high benchmark. Now, these are major issues. Now, of course, there are many more pluses that you have, but I see these are one of the main assets that you have from the way the world is looking at you. But you are the expert, as I said. Now, from the disadvantages that you need to work on, of course, as a developing world, there is an issue of corruption and the legal system that needs to be fixed. There's an issue of organized crime. There's an issue of poverty, right? The common thing with the developing world, and there's an issue of the uncertainty in the economic growth, and of course there's an issue of the political issue and the uncertainty of the politics, the domestic politics, the trade conflicts that happen when you have trade agreements of this level, the cyber threats that you are constantly having, and you will be having more of that. And you need, of course, to keep upgrading your digital infrastructure. Now, especially when you have the artificial intelligence posing itself as a threat that could be endangering the issue of employment, especially for the lower skilled people. So these are some of the sort of the problems that you have, that I see from a macro perspective, from a global perspective, that will come under far more pressure right now with COVID. You can afford to have, corruption at a certain level when you don't have, problems like COVID and the impact on its economy. But with that, add corruption to that, it makes it even worse to deal with and to overcome. The same for, the other problems. So these are, I feel that in terms of challenges, all of these problems that you have now on the slide will become more, more in terms of magnitude and a bigger challenge to any administration because of the COVID and the post-COVID situation. And this is not only a Mexico issue, this is also a global issue. So if I look at every country, all of these flags that you see on the slide, each of them have their own problems. There's not a single country, as you know, doesn't have assets and doesn't have liabilities. So now is the time in the post-COVID world that we know how to better use and optimize the use of your assets, your assets, and how to intelligently deal with the challenges, because we can't afford to continue to having these challenges now with something like COVID or what's coming after COVID. When I talk about COVID, and I know you guys are fed up and tired of this conversation because as we have, and many of these points maybe you've heard before and you know already. But when I speak about that, I don't mind repeating it. I'll tell you why. Because I am not sure this is going to be the end of the story. There is absolutely no guarantee that next year, 2021, 2022, there might not be something even worse than COVID. Who knows? And what if COVID now evolved into a much more dangerous virus that spreads more effectively? So we're really going into a new phase of global threats. I don't see this as a coincidence. If you tie this with whatever we have been doing as humanity to planet Earth, all this arrogance, all this abuse, short-term thinking, absence of global leadership, if you tie this, the way we have been damaging this only single planet that we have in the entire solar system or the universe that we know that's really habitable, right? What's happening now, COVID, right, might not be just, and it might just a once, in a lifetime situation. What if this is going to be a beginning of, a series of genetic mutations that are at the same level? What if this is going to be the nature of reality as we go forward? There are going to be second kind of COVID, a third kind of COVID. So we have to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of our countries, of Mexico, of every country, of the global community with a different level of urgency. That's why I chose some of these highlights to talk about Mexico, to tell you guys, this is not a COVID situation. This is about a new reality, because we don't know if COVID will ever disappear or will not mutate to even a worse virus, or there might not be sisters and brothers of COVID that might even make this threat miniature or minor compared to what's coming next. Now, all of this demands leadership. All of this demands leadership. Remember, I said from the fundamentals, there are pillars in life, actions and consequences. Remember, I said that. If we don't do the right actions, we will suffer the wrong consequences. So COVID will not disappear by itself. Your weaknesses will not go by themselves. And if you ask me, the real problem, if you really now, if I'm going to wear my leadership hat, the real problem is not COVID. The real problem is not the points that I talked about when it came to the weaknesses or the vulnerabilities of Mexico. The real problem, my friend, is the absence of leadership at a domestic level, at a regional level, at an international level, because problems is the default nature of life, of reality. There will always be problems. But what's missing, what demands our contribution is solutions. And who brings solution? Especially at a social and a group level. It is the task of leadership to bring solutions. How does it do that? By mobilizing people. What is leadership? Leadership is about mobilizing people to move forward towards a good purpose. There are three components for leadership. Mobilization, because without mobilization, there's no leadership. People, because it's all about people. And the third one is a good purpose. Otherwise, if it's a bad purpose, then it becomes manipulation, and that becomes evil, becomes malicious, becomes malevolent, right? So the real problem is not COVID. The real problem is not that we have global challenges and threat. There will always be global challenges. If this is the year 2200, there will be global threat and challenges. Look at history. It's not but a big story of global challenges and the way humanity dealt with it in terms of successes and failures and the prices that were paid for that. So I want to talk now about how do we lead transformation in our societies, in our communities, in our countries, in our families, in our departments and organizations, so that we do whatever it takes so to be ready to deal with these challenges, whether they are domestic, departmental, familiar, personal, social, provincial, country, local, international risk. You need leadership that will lead transformation. And why am I talking about transformation? I'm not talking about change. Change is about incremental change, incremental modifications, incremental adjustment that happen, gradually with time. And that's important and part of nature. But sometimes in nature, you have big spikes, either they are positive or negative. These big spikes that are a huge turn and shift in the nature of reality in the course of history and events require transformation, which is a big chunk of change. Transformation comes from the word transform. So your entire being will be transformed. Trans, it means change. Form means the way you look. So it's a major change. That's why I'm going to talk about the dynamics of leading transformation. And I made it deliberately practical. So I'm going to give you practical step, wearing my leadership expert hat or leadership interest hat, so that this conversation becomes practical and helps you. Otherwise, I don't want to keep it on a macro philosophical and geopolitical level, because that is fine in terms of consciousness. But in the end, leadership is about action. It's not just about theories and analysis and interpretation. We have to act. You have to make an intervention. There are three components for leadership: observation, we observe; interpretation, we interpret and analyze; and the third one, we intervene. And what's intervention now? It's about transformation. So these are practical steps that you can use personally in your challenges. And I want you each to think about now, so that you use yourself as a case study use as a personal example in your own life, whether you want your personal life, your familiar life, your departmental, organizational, social, country responsibility, whatever it is. Just think of a personal case study that needs transformation. The following step will be what needs to happen so that you can lead transformation. And if you are in the public sector, in a political community who is leading with these changes, with the challenges that I talked about at the beginning of my intervention of this talk, you can still use the same steps as a state leader, as a statesman or a stateswoman, to deal with whatever is required to reshape your community to deal with these changes, and even at a global level. So let's go to the practical level, so that there's a practical benefit to this conversation with you. Number one, so what do you do when you lead transformation in your organization and community to deal with risks? First thing is to understand, my friends, that the purpose of every organization, every being, everything that exists and is alive is to survive and to grow. This is the fundamental philosophy that I use to think about life and to think about leadership. Everything we do, everything we say, we do it for the purpose of survival and growth. There are no exceptions. The reason we're having this conversation now is because of the thought and the perception and belief that when we have this conversation, people who listen will enhance their level of consciousness and will add insights and will help them in their survival and growth journey. So this is the fundamental issue. You lead, you transform, so that you enhance the subject of survival, the purpose of survival and growth. That's why we do things. The second thing is, to do that, because we live in an environment that's continuously changing, we have no choice but to go through the process of adaptation. So leadership is leading people through the process of adaptation. Leadership in Mexico is how to lead the Mexican community and country through the process of adaptation to deal with, to survive in COVID-19 era, and to survive and grow beyond or post the COVID-19 era. The same thing for you. You lead transformation in your company to survive in this new now situation, new reality, and to grow when you get out of this reality and things are more stabilized, so that you go back to your growth purpose. So leadership is about adaptation also, and that's what you have to lead to in the process of transformation. The third one, my friend, is there is no choice when it comes to this. It's not a matter of choice. Leading transformation is not a matter of choice. This is what you see now in the picture is a technological threat that could have been solved by transformation. Nokia died because they were not able to deal with the disruption that Apple brought. The disruption happened to the economy, and they failed in adaptation and failed in transforming themselves, and that's why, as a company, they died, or they are almost dead, at least compared to they used to be. So there's not a matter of choice. The same thing applies now. There's not a matter of choice. If we don't know how to lead transformation so that we survive during the challenges of COVID-19, we will die. Bodies of people who are collapsing and dying now by the thousands are dying because they're not able to adapt to dealing with the threat of the virus by producing the right immunity systems. So threats like COVID are also imposing that we go into transformational leadership mode, not just technological one. The other one that we're facing now is the political and geopolitical tensions, like the tensions we have now between the United States and China. These are also other reasons why we should go into the process of transformation, because the world is changing geopolitically. So you have technological requirements or disruptions that demand leading transformation. You have physiological and biological reasons, health reasons, right, to your entire physical presence. And you have geopolitical also reasons that you have to adapt to through a process of transformation, because definitely the world is changing, and it's obvious that China and the United States are more and more into a direction of collision. Today I read a report that says China has just opened the world's largest satellite manufacturing compound. They're going to be producing satellites by the masses, just like they produce shoes by the masses. Can you imagine the scale? China now will start producing satellites. So imagine the threat that will impose, right? So, and it's out of control. Chinese technology now, the way they have been creating momentum, it will be hard to stop. And that will take both countries into definitely a state of more tension and possible different kinds of levels of collision. The other important element to lead transformation is what's happening next to you, and that's the elections in the United States, because that will also shape the biggest country in the world economically and politically and militarily, and will have an impact on geopolitics and the mindset behind leading the global community, at least politically and economically. So that also is the reason for transformation. People who did not transform after Trump took over suffered. People who will not transform if Trump loses will suffer. People who will refuse to transform if Trump wins, they will also suffer, because Trump will be even a different kind of Trump. I'm not talking politically now, I'm talking in terms of history and leadership in his second term, because he has nothing to lose now. And people behave differently, president behave differently in the second term. So that's also another reason to transform. Now, how do you transform? There are a number of philosophical concepts and also practical concepts that you need to take into considerations while you're thinking about transformation. As I said, these are fundamentals. Now, I know for sure that you know them, but as I always say when I talk about leadership, this is not about intellectual conversation. if you have read 50 leadership books and you have like 600 degrees and 50 PhDs, right? And it's all in your mind, but you don't exercise what you learn and what you know, it is completely useless. So I always go to the fundamentals and make sure that when I'm advising companies as an advisor or as a member of the board of directors, executive or non-executive, or in my job, career as CEO, what matters to me more is whether you put what you know into action. Otherwise, it's just political or intellectual conversation at a theoretical level. So let's go to them and let's see how you can put them into action, because without them, you cannot transform. The principle number one is to let go of whatever is not necessary anymore. The reason that COVID-19 has changed the world is that it has made us discover abruptly that there's so many things in life we don't need anymore. And I'll give you a very classical example. Many companies have just discovered that they don't really need to have all their staff in the same place. This is the most classical example. And now they said, even if COVID-19 disappears, we don't really need people in our premises anymore. So working from home is going to be the norm from now on, right? So wherever technological advances were already in place, but they were not properly utilized before, COVID-19 has pushed us to adopt permanently. So, and that means we change the way we live. That means we have to let go of what is not necessary anymore. And that's how nature works. That's how evolution works. What the DNA does in the process of evolution is that it lets go of all the genes that is not necessary anymore. That's what was happening to us. We are losing our wisdom tooth now. Why? Because we don't need it. So whatever has no need is not needed anymore. Nature discards it, and we have to do the same. So you, as you lead your companies, departments, organizations, countries, families, whatever is businesses, you have to decide what do you really don't need, and you have to have the courage to let go, because that takes courage, because we're usually attached to them. There's no time for sentiments or nostalgia. We have enough time to prove that some of the old things are not needed anymore. So it's time to let them go, and you have to decide what that is, and you have to act on it, because leadership is action. It's not just talk, it's action. The second thing that you have to think about in the process of leading transformation is, what is the core assets that you have, strengths that you need to absolutely protect? What is that you need to protect? Your core strength. Now, theoretically, you know that, but have you really defined it? If you define what is your core strengths of your company, organization, university, family, culture, community, economy, finances, business, whatever it is, which line of business is core, whatever it is, you have to absolutely define what your core strength is. And this has been already highlighted because the crisis, although it has a health facade, it has also a manifested economic and practical and technological, dimensions. And it became obvious what is core to us, what should be protected, what we cannot do without, right? So you have to decide in your own case study that you're thinking about now as we talk, what is core that you should keep in your mind, because it is absolutely your main source of strength. The third one is, what should you acquire as a new element? What is it that you don't have that you should acquire? Skills, knowledge, technology, thinking, mindset, habits, values, virtues, ways of behavior, ways of communication, you name it. What is it that you need to learn that you don't know, is completely new to you and to your department, team, people, community, nation, you name it. We have to acquire that. And you have to make a conscious and intelligent, smart decision on defining it and on putting the right mechanisms to ensure that this is incorporated in your system. The fourth one is, what should be underemphasized? What should you do less of? It is not core, but it's important, but you don't need to do it as much as you did, but you can't get rid of it because you need it. So what should be underemphasized in your company, organization, department, and the rest? And the fifth one is what should be overemphasized, what should you do more of. So this is how biology and evolution works. And this is how leadership should be working in terms of its philosophical thinking, its roadmap, its philosophical pillars of thinking, of planning, right, of strategizing, so that it can mobilize people along these pillars. And this has to be applied on two dimensions, physiologically and psychologically. So think of your physiological dimension, right, business, structure, whatever it is, anything that is materialistic and physical, and in terms of mindset, intellect, skills, values, virtues, culture. So on the psychology and on the physiology level, you have to apply all these components, what you keep, discard, underline, and underemphasize, overemphasize, and what you learn as a new skill. It has to happen at these three dimensions. And it has to apply to the following types of adaptations. There are a number of times of transformations, right? You have to do them in synchronization mode. What are they? The structural adaptation. So what do you have to change on a structural level, right? The fundamentals, the structure. The second one is the procedural, the way you do things, the how of things, procedures and policies and regulations and way of doing things. The third one is the mindset, the mentality, the intellectual one, the way we think about them. And the fourth one, of course, it is the behavioral one. How do we act? So if you fail in terms of leading transformation at any of these, the chances that you will survive and grow in dealing with a post-COVID threat or challenge at a local, domestic, personal, developmental, departmental, global, national level will fail. You need to think at that level. If Mexico does not handle its challenges at this level, the way things are happening will become overwhelming, because you and I already have problems and we're already in a crisis management mode. So COVID made everything much worse, and what's coming might be even bigger. So we need to act at that level. We cannot take this lightly anymore. And we have to do that with a positive mindset, because this is the nature of reality. This is not a disaster, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's happening. It's not a catastrophe. It's not a disaster. This is the nature of reality. This is not, oh my God. No. Every generation had its own challenges. And in my thinking, every 10 years or so, 7 to 10 years, every human being or family or business or society or community or structure or an entire system will be facing a tsunami at that level. So we have to take it with a positive mindset, because it's the nature of reality, and you can't argue with reality, because every time you argue with reality, you fail. Reality always wins. So make sure that you have a positive mindset. This is not a panic mindset. This is how to be a realist, not how to panic. This is not a crisis. It is much more important because it's fundamental. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that adaptation is a constant process. This is not a once in a lifetime thing. And you know that for sure. But it doesn't matter if you and I know it. We have to make it our way of living. Now, it doesn't have to be a stressful situation. It has to be a way of life. Now, we all need stability, right? Because that's human nature. But we should always plan things so that a part of reality is always unstable. We're always 10%, 20%, something is changing around us. And we do have to do this strategically if we're thinking with a leadership mindset, so that the system does not rest. It is not destabilized, because otherwise it will panic and be paralyzed, and it will freeze, or will be, will lose concentration. At the same time, it will not be, stuck in a stagnation zone. They call it comfort zone. I call it the diminishing zone, because what happens is that you're not really comfortable. You're dying slowly without noticing. So it's a diminishing zone. That's my definition of it. It's not a comfort zone. So what you do is you do adaptation as a constant mindset, but you do it with a positive approach, because you celebrate it and you make it part of your challenge as you go forward in the journey of survival and growth. So how do you do that? You have to be good in building a compelling story to sell and you have to emphasize on the benefits. So in your company, your country, you have to build a compelling story. If it's not a compelling story, it is very hard to ask people to engage in a process of transformation, because with transformation, there will be pain, because it's major change. So you have to emphasize the benefits that relate to them. That's how you make it compelling. You have to make it a survival and growth opportunity issue for your audience. So you build a compelling story. Then you create a state of urgency, because people will never transform, or not. I'm not talking about change. I'm talking about real fundamental transformation. I'm talking about, turnaround. I'm talking about, what Lee Kuan Yew did to Singapore. I'm talking about what Gandhi did to India. I'm talking about during the process of independence. I'm talking about, nation builders did to create their nation. I'm talking about Lou Gerstner, the way he changed IBM. I'm talking about Steve Jobs, the way he changed Apple after he took over. So you have to create a state of urgency. Otherwise, no urgency, people will not be gearing towards transformation. They will take it easy. You have to light fire under their chair so that they can move so fast. But you have to do it intelligently through a compelling, motivating story that emphasizes the benefits. And you have to involve everybody, of course, because if they're not involved, they will become a force that you will have a burden on you. So the more you involve people around you in your department, in your team, in your family, the more you bring them, make them part of this transformation team, give them ownership, the easier it will become. Also, you have to create a spearhead team, right? You have to create a spearhead team. Just look at the spear. What really does the penetration is not the entire body. It's like the spear is like a 2-meter thing or 2.5-meter thing. The part that does the penetration is the metal arrow at the top. So you have to create that metal arrow that will penetrate. So you have to find a team that will spearhead. If you look at the bell curve, right, the majority is under the bell, right? The minority are lagging behind, they will drag you. The middle are passive and they're easily oriented by opinion leaders, by influencers. And then the minority on the side are people who are enthusiastic, they get it. So you have to know how to define them and use them as your core team of commando, of strike force, of your elite force, so that they create momentum and they create change and they inspire and lead the majority that is lagging behind. And you have to know how to define these people and motivate them. Then you have to over-communicate. Again, I'm telling you things that probably most of you know, but as I said, the test is not in knowing them intellectually. Because if you fail in applying any of these, then transformation will suffer and your survival and growth, especially in times of crisis like COVID and post-COVID, will suffer and you will pay the consequences. So over-communicate as much as you can. And the moment you thought that you have over-communicated, you're not even halfway through. You will get bored, fed up, tired. It doesn't matter. Keep saying it until people get fed up. And when they get fed up, don't stop. Keep doing it. Become a broken record, because people pretend that they will get it, but they didn't. Right? So keep saying it until you lose your breath. That's how it works with people. Then you have to know how to reframe the issue of stress. So you have to change from a stress situation into a positive situation. You have to move it from stress into excitement, stress into a challenge, stress into a race, stress into competition. So you have to reframe the tension that we build, that will come up with your system as it goes into dealing with the post-COVID threats to your survival and growth. So you have to reframe it. And that also requires smart and intelligent leadership skills to know how to present it. Of course, you have to respect the past, because people will be losing their past that they adore and they're attached to and they have memories with. So you have to respect it and honor it so that people don't go against you. Otherwise, you will suffer. You have to be empathetic as much as possible. Be empathetic, because people will be in pain, and you have to hold them and grab them and hug them and be sympathetic and empathetic to their pains. Otherwise, you will disconnect with them and they will not follow you. They need you to be a human being. Leadership is about being a human being, because you're leading humans, and humans are mind and heart, not just mind. They're also heart. You have to lead with your heart and your mind. Use all your resources, because you will need them. Transformation is a super hard job, right? So use every tool you have. Don't let anybody, anything, saved. Use all your weapons. This is the major weapon of your survival and growth. So use every possible resource, right? Continuously reassess, because you will get it wrong, and you will have to continuously evaluate so that you refine your moving forward process. This is the process of transformation to prepare for post-COVID survival and growth and for the current reality. Keep a learning mindset, because as you will assess the situation, you will have to learn so that you can apply what you learn and refine, keep fine-tuning, because nobody gets it right from the first time. You will also need to get all the help that you can, because nobody can do it alone. So this is not time for arrogance. You have to be open-minded and humble. You can't do it alone. This is not about your story of heroism. This is about succeeding in mobilizing people. So get all the help that you can, right? Don't make it about you. It's not about ego. Of course, there will be resistance. So you have to learn how to deal with resistance. You have to do that intelligently, right? And there is an entire dynamic. I have written a 500-page book about how to deal with resistance. I'll show you the book now. It's not an advertisement, but you will like the title. It's called "How to Trump the Enemy," right? It's the Trump here does not mean Trump as a president. It means how do you overcome and outsmart the competition. And by the way, I sent the first copy to Donald Trump himself and got his permission, documented letter, to use this title. So he has it as his first copy, right? And it's a 500-page thing, 480, right? It's all about how do you strategies for dealing with your leadership opponent. Why is this important? Because when people's leadership efforts fail, transformation fail, not because of lack of allies, it's because of lack of how to deal with your opponents, saboteurs, your resistors, and they will be at different categories in all aspects of your reality. Internal, external, family, friends, colleagues, constituencies, competition, you name it, right? So you have to know how to do that, right? Otherwise, transformation will fail. Of course, you have to be persistent, right? Be persistent, because this is a long journey. And if you're not persistent, you will give up. It is going to be bumpy, full of failures and successes. Get ready. This is going to be a very difficult journey, right? There's going to be a lot of turbulences. So fasten your seatbelt, celebrate every success, learn from every failure. It is not going to be an easy ride. Never give up, because it's going to be one of the most important journeys of your life to save your company, your family, your department, your country. Otherwise, if you don't survive, you die. If you don't grow, you will not survive, and then you will die. It's not a matter of, it's not a luxury. You have to do that. And my last two slides is adapt or die. You know that it is not, this is not, and this has never have been true as it is now, because of the current challenge, and but because of what's coming next. I'm not just worried about, of course I'm worried about the health issues, but I see from a geopolitical macro perspective, the next 5-10 years, God help us, it's going to be really turbulent as this stress continues to manifest itself on the different facets of societies everywhere. This is just the beginning, right? It's like divorce. I know it's a bad thing, but maybe it's not a nice example. Most of the problems of divorce happen after, when you start the process, after the consequences, right? So because then shows things come to the surface. So adapt or die. And my last point, ladies and gentlemen, is that in the end, all of this comes to one point. It is a leadership challenge. This cannot happen without leadership. Take out leadership, all of this will fail. The reason societies have failed is not because they did not understand the situation. It's not because they did not diagnose it properly. It is not that because they didn't have the intellectual capacity to come up with solutions. It's not that because they don't have smart people. It's not that because they don't know how to articulate it. I am sure Mexico, or your organization, is full of brilliant people who can not just solve the problem of Mexico intellectually, but the entire world. But the things are they are, the way they are now is because of shortage of leadership, because the core of leadership is to mobilize people through the journey of survival and growth, and that's what's at stake now. It's all about now how do we make it through COVID, and how do we turn this into an opportunity for humanity and for your country and for all the countries of the world and for your organization and yourself. I thank you for your attention. I'm sorry if this has taken too long. And I open now the space for your contributions, because I'm sure we can all learn a lot from your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I think it has been a great presentation that you have made, and especially that there is a lot of things. I took a lot of notes, about 10 pages that I took notes about what you were saying about the presentations and so forth. And there are some questions or comments of the people that actually I would like to transfer, and share with some of them to ask the questions directly. But I have just to start, at the very beginning, you mentioned several key points on of the main principles, and one of them I think is very important is the adaptation. Are we going to be adapting ourselves to this new reality that we are facing? You mentioned several times, for example, the case of China, the case of the U.S., and putting that perspective into Mexico and where we are living. As you know, our main trade partner here in Mexico, because of the strategic location, is actually the United States. And we depend a lot on the US. 85% of our trade actually goes to the US. How do you perceive, from an external point of view, for example, the trade war between China and the US? How eventually we're really looking forward that we could get a benefit out of that, but how do you perceive it from the outside? I mean, because we really believe that instead of saying a collateral damage, I will say that we will have a collateral benefit out of that. What is your perspective from the outside?
My perspective, my friend, is that this is going to become a more tense and heated interaction. If Trump wins, of course, it depends a lot on the mindset behind the current and future expected leadership of the United States. So this is going to become more tense for many reasons. I think even if Trump did not win, it would still become an issue because for one main reason, I don't think China is stoppable now. So China is unstoppable. The way China, in terms of size, momentum, money, financial strength, technology, the solidity of its system, the solidity of its leadership, the way the structure of the country is run now, and the stability they have all the components of a very long-term trajectory that has one direction, and that's expansion. Of course, you know of the Silk Road, new Silk Roads that they have been building through the entire world, coming through Pakistan, through the subcontinent, Sri Lanka, and now Iran, and then the Gulf, and now and Italy, and the whole. So they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars to lay the infrastructure of a very long time expansion mode that is going to take into the entire century of 2020 of 2000 until 2100 and beyond maybe. So this is the long-term thing, and regardless of who's in the White House, this will continue. Now, from the outside, the language will change if, let's say, Biden was elected, and sometimes even if Trump was elected, sometimes the language might become softer or more or sharper, but the fundamentals are there. China is unstoppable in terms of growth. Now, will there be military growth, military expansion, political expansion? I don't know. I remember when I was at Princeton, I went through a course, this was 15, 20 years ago, that said, is China a friend or an enemy? Imagine how old is this story. 20 years ago, people have been discussing this in the past, and look where China is now. So the tension will continue. That's number one. Now, so China will fight with everything it can to maintain its current position, and to expand, regardless of what the United States is doing and will continue to do. Now, will the US abandon this battle, trade battle with China? No, because also it has so much to lose. So I think this will be more intense. Now, part of this will reflect on the supply chain, which we didn't talk about as part of the repercussions of COVID, because they're going to be rearranged. Globalization will change to a certain extent. And it's this talk that the supply chain might be, driven away, at least partially, from China. Now, people like your country and other countries are dreaming that they will attract the supply chain, right? This is a possibility, and it's a prospect that you guys and other countries should be paying very good attention to. But you're not alone. There's also Vietnam, and there's also Thailand, and Malaysia, and Indonesia, and all these other countries that have, and India, and all have, like you, all the competitive advantages that one can think of, and they've already have been looking at China as a competitor in terms of attracting American business. So you are also competing against those. And part of the talk also is to attract the supply chain back to America, right? To made in America sort of philosophy thing or title. So is there an opportunity for you? Yes, there is. Are you going to be the only people who are competing for that you capture a greater share of the rearrangement of the supply chain? Yes, there are going to be opportunities, but you're not going to be alone. And let me remind you of what I said on purpose at the beginning, and that is the following. You need to get prepared in terms of the fundamentals. The fundamentals. Rearranging the supply chain is not a short-term strategy. You don't move factories and spend hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was estimated about more than $1 trillion to rearrange the supply chain from China. You're not going to get that on a short-term thinking, at least from the people who are involved in terms of the business owners. They will do this based on a long-term view. So they need to think about long-term issues, stability, all the other components that need to exist, technology, governance, corruption, legal systems, availability of technology, the presence of employment. So the question is Mexico ready to be a competitor compared to the other contenders who are, lobbying to become some people, the people who will inherit some of the supply chain of China, right, to their countries? Are you going to win this battle? Do you have the fundamentals to beat them? Can you do that? That's why I said you need to pay attention and go to the fundamentals now. And it has to be in a transformational mindset, giving it priority with urgency, so that when this becomes ready, when people start talking about this, you have a compelling case to take to the world, to say that, guys, okay, you have so many other options, Vietnam and others, but we're also next to you, and this is what we offer you. And the thing is that people know you. I mean, the United States, they know you very well. So you can't really, you can't except be transparent with them. So you really have to present a compelling case to them to convince them that you are a better choice than other people who are looking at the same opportunities. I think you have a chance, but it all depends on the leadership that will apply in your public sector, and equally so in your private sector, to present a compelling case to the new economy that will emerge soon in terms of global, rearranging globalization and shifting supply chain.
Right, thank you for your time. I will share the word to one of the people actually to have it more interactive. There is a colleague and also a professor also from the Monterrey Tech, Jesus Garza, would like to make a presentation. Jesus, are you there so you can make it directly?
Yes, I'm here. Can you guys listen?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Michael, thank you very much for your talk. Very, very good, very interesting. I just had a couple of questions. The first one is related to closing key sectors on the economy. It seems like many countries, particularly populist economies, are trying to close sectors of the economy as a way to foster growth. But my question would be, do you think economic liberalism is dead? And the second thing would be, I don't think it is, because in Europe and developed nations, economic liberalism has actually increased or enhanced productivity through competition. And I'm going back to what you said about supply chains. It seems that we want to take advantage of supply chain exports to the US, but do you think supply chains will be automated robots will make all these supply chains production processes, that we need to focus more on the technological aspects of the future of job creation, not only supply chain? In fact, China, as you well mentioned, doesn't care about supply chain anymore. They export supply chain to poorer nations, such as the UK and other liberal economies. Do you think it's a bad idea to depend on supply chains as a way to foster economic growth? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Number one, do I think liberal economy will disappear? I think this is an illusion. I mean, we're becoming more connected, regardless of the new talk about, of course, nationalism is fine now, and and isolation and contracting back, all of this is fine, but I don't think you can reverse the natural course of history. I always go back to the fundamentals, and I learn from nature and history. The world has always been global. I mean, we in Lebanon, our ancestors, we come from the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians have been some of the masters of globalization 3,000 years ago, using very primitive boats to colonize the entire Mediterranean and go around in Spain. And some people say maybe when they went also to some of the east coast of America. So globalization has always been there. It will always be here. And nobody can stop the interaction of people and the flow of trade between nations. Because what is the alternative? You readjust your entire production dimension just to focus on local markets, or on regional markets, or on small, specifically tailored bilateral agreement. You might go through phases of that, and that's related, I think. This is also related to the spirit of nationalism that came recently. But eventually, I think the world is going to become far more connected over time. I'm talking over time. We go up and down, but the trend is more globalization and more connectedness. I don't even like to call it globalization. I think connectedness is a deeper concept, and eventually this will continue. And I think it's in the interest of the companies itself, the economies itself, in the US and others, to open more market, not close markets. So I mean, I have full respect for politics, but one of the major drivers of politics is the economy, right? So and major economy, and so especially the deep economy, will always want open markets. So that will not happen. That's one. Number two, you're right what you said about China. China, I mean, already it has a huge domestic market, 1.5 billion almost people. That alone, I mean, that alone is an entire economy by itself at the global level. That's number one. Number two, they already have their agreement. They've laid the infrastructure. They have been thinking ahead. They have been already preempting the tension with the US, and they've spent all of this money, cultivating countries and building all these ports. They put 60 billion in to build infrastructure in Pakistan. They put similar kinds of amount of money in Singapore, in what's his name, in Sri Lanka. They bought the port there, and Iran now. And they're not naive. I mean, Chinese people have thousands of years of history, and they know how to handle these things. So that will continue. The third element is, yes, you're very right, that technology, and as I said in my presentation when I talk about the economical issue from a geopolitical threat, AI and new advancements will pose a global role. So one of your challenges is automation and AI and big data and the entire, all these components of the new economy. But that doesn't stop you from being ready for that as well. I mean, what does AI need? It needs smart people, and you need basic infrastructure, right? It doesn't need heavy machinery. So if you invest in that, I know China has built an entire city maybe I mean, in Chinese language, to focus on developing an AI. So I don't see why Mexico cannot do the same. And even if they need to build robots and intelligent and artificial intelligent machines, why don't you guys become exporters of that? And these things, these people will need also, physical places. So that definitely will be a challenge. What's the choice? To retreat from this reality? No, you have no choice but to become masters of this, to be in the game of artificial intelligence and robotics and become major players in this. And if there's competition, you take part of it and you win as much as you can. And being next to the US and by adding some other incentives, so why not also attract even that kind of business of economy to you? So AI want to run the new economy or manufacturing, so fine, put some extra benefits and make it AI that works or that's made in Mexico. It is going to be a part of the new alphabet of the economy at the global level, and we will all have to compete with AI in the future. And you guys are very well placed to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I have one of our colleagues have a question, and this actually enrolled me at some point to lead me to a point where the university where I teach, the University of Monterrey, one of the things that we see in the strategic planning class is how to get the engagement of the people. And one of our colleagues is asking, what are your recommendations in terms of getting the civic engagement in this society that in many cases, for example, Mexico lives in a developing economy. We face all the challenges and any other developing economy it's facing. 50% of our entire population is considered poor. So there is a lot of lack of infrastructure and so forth. But what are your recommendations to engage to get that civic engagement of the people in general, especially in terms that have to do with development, try to persuade them with the benefits of development, what are going to be the main things that are going to be getting the benefits out of them. What are your perceptions on those type of experiences that you may have had in some other the boards that you participate and the advice that you give to some other countries?
Listen, I see when people say 50% of the population is in poverty, it is of course a major social and economic problem, but it's also a great opportunity. I mean, if I'm the president and they tell me 50% of the population is in poverty, then immediately I have a priority on my agenda. I mean, it's obvious. I look at it as a reservoir, right? Because the poverty there is a consequence of many things. So if you look at the deep roots of these, right, they're obvious, and you guys know them. And of course, one of the main ways of dealing with that is investing in education and investing in technological infrastructure and in the internet and the whole thing. And for that, I go a lot to India and I give lots of talks, and I sit on many boards in India and in Singapore. I mean, listen, you can't beat India when you talk about poverty. Can you beat India? You can't beat India when it comes to poverty. You can't beat China when it comes to poverty. Just 20 years ago, 30 years ago, what was the population of people who are poor in China and India compared to now, right? So there's so many cases. You look at Singapore, although it's a small case, but what I'm saying, this is not a new problem. I say again, this is a problem of leadership. If you have the proper leadership who can invest in providing this 50% of the population, and in your case, we're talking about tens of millions of people. If you invest in providing education, if you're providing smart education, it doesn't have to be classical education anymore now. So we learned from COVID that you can provide education. It doesn't have to be by building this costly infrastructure of schools and universities. So if you just develop, good internet communication systems and provide people with cheap laptop and good connection, right? Then you have people now. You can easily have people now. You can invest in the education of people and raise people from at least poverty at the educational level to a higher standard and make them more prepared in terms of being ready to join the labor force, and then especially the skilled labor force. So I see it's a measure of leadership mobilizing the civic community to work at a grassroots level so that you can take the fundamentals that can deal with the issues of education, right? Providing technology, right, to the masses. I mean, you know, microbanking, microfinancing, right? I mean, everybody knows microfinancing. They took financing to the micro level. Why don't you take education and technology and communication to the micro level and take it to all villages and take it to all, all sectors that are poor? And why don't you, as a society, as a community, create more of these NGOs? Leadership should divert and encourage NGOs to invest more on them. I have studied carefully how China and India made it, and the main word that comes to mind is education, especially higher education. And this was 10 and 15 and 20 years ago. They invested in higher education, and then they made sure that they can compete globally, and they sent thousands and hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people to the best schools in the world and subsidized them, and they built similar schools internally. Now with internet and distant learning and the whole thing, this has become much easier. So what I look at, and to conclude, I look at the 50 million as a major social, ethical, moral, economic problem, of course, but a major opportunity for leadership to do something and use this reservoir as a strategic, bank that could be used to upgrade everything you have in the workforce, right? By working on this, using the current technology and the current means of education and bringing them back. And you can do that in 5 years and 10 years time. You can easily do that in 10 years time. So to summarize, leadership has to mobilize more entities, public or private or civic, because I also see opportunities for private investment there, so that they can create new models that will go to these poor areas, provide telecommunication, provide smart education, and bring them back, and then immediately recruit them. And you don't need to use pressures like people have to come to the cities and all the sociological issues and civic and modernity issues that came with migration into cities to do that. People now from COVID and after COVID will be working from their homes. I know a friend who has been sitting in Barcelona, who has been working as a consultant to the Saudi government for months, maybe a year now, providing them high level of consultancy, and he hasn't even been there. All what he has is a laptop, a smart brain, and a connection. So over the long term, if you invest in this, I think you can turn the 50% into an asset, provided you have the right leadership. The solutions are there, Samuel. The solutions are there. It have been done in many countries, and we know now why India and China are so successful. Because what they did 20 years ago. Well, now we don't have 20 years. So somebody has to take charge of this and start mobilizing all these sectors to putting more attention so that we can apply what they did, best practices modified to your culture, right? And bring these people into the high-skilled labor segment, and then start competing. Because in the end, the biggest differential that will happen, that will make a difference, is the human intellect, right? Is the brain, is the human mind, right? And if you have like 100 million people or 50 million people who are poor, in terms of IQ, I'm sure there are like 10% of them, maybe 150 plus in terms of IQ, and maybe 5% or 3% absolute geniuses, right? So you already have it. Just find these people, mobilize them, give them the right education, channel them properly into the economy, and they will lead. It's a solvable problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course, absolutely. Well, I think we have come to an end, and it was a really great presentation that you have made, and we really thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. I would like to pass the word to Mr. Turner to say one last words, but thank you again for this magnificent presentation that you have made. Mr. Turner, I don't know if you're there, so you can share with us some thoughts, final thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. It was very interesting, very, very interesting to review all the really big crises that we have in front of us in terms of the global. So we should that help us to take perspective. No, we are not the only ones having problems in the world. As a matter of fact, we are having maybe less problems than most countries in the world. So thank you very much for that perspective, and thank you very much for all the, let's say, the different the approach that you have to let's say enhance the leadership abilities in Mexico. Let me try to address our constituency in Spanish, please. Creo yo que lo que Michael nos dice es de que las soluciones están, que sabemos qué es lo que tenemos que hacer, pero alguien tiene que hacerse cargo y movilizar es la palabra. Creo que ya pasamos del punto en donde debemos de preguntar qué hacer. La NEI tiene bien claro qué hacer. Tiene una propuesta bastante analizada, completa, sustanciada, factible de realizar, ¿verdad? Ortodoxa, práctica, pero nos hace falta venderla, nos hace falta esa compelling story que habla Michael, de visualizar este país como un país próspero y visualizarnos nosotros en ese país próspero de alto crecimiento. Y no lo hemos podido hacer porque nos ha faltado la capacidad de liderazgo, nos ha faltado la capacidad de movilizarnos. Efectivamente, lo que hemos hecho es alentador porque la NEI tiene una presencia, tiene una imagen que está mejorando, tiene más capacidades y habilidades ejecutivas que como esta plática, por ejemplo, y las otras anteriores que hemos hecho, pero nos falta más movilización. Y la pregunta aquí es cómo debemos de movilizarnos. Y más que sugerirle a otros cómo hacerlo, más bien es qué puedo hacer yo para ayudar a que la NEI se movilice mejor. ¿Qué tengo que aportar? ¿Qué puedo dar? ¿Qué es lo que no estoy haciendo? ¿Qué debo hacer? ¿Qué es lo que estoy haciendo y que no ayuda, sino al contrario, que estorba? Creo que ese es el punto principal, no preguntar, estar preguntando qué hacer. Lo que Michael dice es muy cierto, nosotros somos mexicanos, estamos aquí, sabemos qué hacer. De hecho, ese es el resultado de una clase, de un semestre en Harvard, analizando por qué unos países tienen éxito y otros no. Y la respuesta es vayan a su país, analicen el país, estudienlo y propongan soluciones que sean adecuadas a las personas que tienen las soluciones en sus manos, en este caso los empresarios. Entonces, la pregunta aquí es cómo movilizarnos, cómo puedo yo ayudar. And again, I would like to thank Michael. It was a very interesting and stimulating talk, and we congratulate you for all your job and for all your 12 or more books that you have written. And we expect you to Mexico. You have your friends here. You have your home here. Of course, you are welcome at my home here in Monterrey. And also you are welcome at a penthouse that I have in Puerto Vallarta, which is a very nice resort. I don't know if you are married or no, your family or no, but you are welcome with all your family. Thank you very much again.
I have 2 kids, and you will be pleased that the name of my elder daughter, her name is Maria Elena. So I'm sure this is a famous name in Mexico. Listen,
bring them with you, and they will enjoy very much here.
I will. Fernando, thank you so much for inviting me. I cherish so much the relationship that we have. You are a very elegant, graceful, intellectual entrepreneur and a global thinker that I always respected. So I'm happy that we maintain this friendship. Thank you so much. My regards to your family, and I promise you that Mexico has always been on my list, and I will come soon and enjoy your company face to face. Samuel, thank you so much for facilitating this. What I have tried to do is to remind you of the key fundamentals that you already know about. Because as I said, it's not about just knowing, it's about putting your understanding, your knowledge into action. Only action will make things happen. Consciousness is super important, but consciousness does not translate into action, nothing will happen. So that's why I chose deliberately to remind you and emphasize some of the key points that you already know, and to stress on the issues of leadership, because that is what's missing. You guys have all the fundamentals and you have so many assets to make it big time, and all your problems are solvable if they are approached with the right leadership mentality. That's why I focused on the practical side, so that we make this all to send you a message that this can happen and there are ways of happening, and it's possible that you guys make it happen. I wish Mexico all the luck and success. You are a blessed country. You have contributed so much to humanity through culture and through music and through food and through so many different aspects that has enriched humanity. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person. And please let me know if I can be of any kind of assistance to you and your organization, of help. For me, we come from the Middle East. We are warm-blooded people, and we have an emotional heart. So we make friends and we hug, and we're warm people. And you guys are the same. So I look forward that I come there, and we established a deeper friendship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
God bless Mexico.